Our final speaker is Director, Rights and Risk Analysis Group, Mr. SUHAS CHAKMA. Your precious 10 minutes starts now.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Justice Mishraji, and other distinguished participants in this conference. And I speak here as an activist, human rights activist, somebody who belongs to a small community of about 250,000 people and who are always in the news on rights issues in a country of 1.43 billion people. And I speak as somebody who has been a witness to the evolution of the National Human Rights Commission of India and all other national human rights institutions. I think 30 years is a long time. We are celebrating here 30 years of the NHRIs, 50 years, 75 years of the UDHR, 30 years of the Paris Principles. And I think 30 years back, if we are to look back, I think in the universities we were studying, I was a student of economics, we are being taught mixed economy in Eastern Europe, when Eastern Europe no longer existed in terms of practicing, mixed economy. And when we started human rights activism 30 years back, I think we are told that that the world has at the end of history, because that's something which Francis Fukuyama had written after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and we are told about the upcoming class of civilizations, even though former Yugoslavia was being torn apart. And at that point of time, if we look back today, I think 30 years down the line, we still see almost the same factors, which is basically the contest between the remnants of the totalitarian regimes and the democratic forces, in which possibly even the oldest democracy or the largest democracy or any other democracy are not immune from. And there is everywhere you could see little Balkans where conflicts are taking place. So it basically reminds that the human rights is a continuous struggle, and we have to be vigilant on that. I think one more thing which I wanted to mention is that 30 years ago, I think one of the momentous decision which was taken was the World Conference on Human Rights in Vienna in June 1993, where a number of recommendations were adopted to strengthen, support, and recognize the importance of the national human rights institutions. And I think in 30 years down the line, we have come a long way, and there are, within the Asia Pacific regions, as we know, 26 national human rights institutions, which vary from country to country. Sometimes they're hybrid institutions, some are policy institutions, some are quasi-judicial institutions with the power to adjudicate on complaints, etc. And I think each of us, whether human rights organizations or the national human rights institutions, are struggling to fulfill the mandate of the task or meet the expectation from each one of us. And I just want to mention or share a little experience with the National Human Rights Commission of India, which will be quite useful. And I just want to share this particular point to stress one particular aspect, which is the need for engagement, and I'll come why we need to engage. I think when the National Human Rights Commission was being set up in 1992, when the first statement was made by Vittal Gadgil, who was the Congress spokesperson at that time, that a National Human Rights Commission will be established, the positions of the NGOs was little bit hesitant. We did not know what this commission would be. There was little knowledge or awareness about the Paris Principles, and the Paris Principles were not elaborated. And the first meeting to establish this National Human Rights Commission was the meeting of the chief ministers, which took place in Delhi. Then, of course, the government came to an ordinance in 1992. Then the commission was established through a law in 1993. So the NGOs had their doubts, but I still remember 4 or 5 of us, we are trying to engage, prepare the briefing papers from our own perspective, what the National Human Rights Commission should be like, and actually submitted the papers for the Ministry of Home Affairs and the chief ministers who were participating in it. When the NHRC was set up, I would say I think the members of the civil society had numerous reservations, including at that point of time the first chair of the commission. And I think one of the momentous steps which was taken when the NHRC was initially set up was to issue the first directions with respect to custodial deaths, custodial rape in India. And I think NHRC had gone to play the most significant role to highlight this particular menace as well as take measures. And as somebody who comes from a small community, I could say that had the first chairman of the National Human Rights Commission had not decided to approach the Supreme Court of India, I don't think my own community, the Chakmas, would have survived in Arunachal Pradesh. And the NHRC at that same point of time, I think, issued a series of directions in January 1997, how the Chakmas should be identified, they had to be identified as foreigners, and that you could not deport anybody without the sanction of the National Human Rights Commission. So people who are from India, they would know that the Chakmas are a small community who live in 3 or 4 states of Northeast India, which has its own challenges. I would say, I think, the actions of the National Human Rights Commission has been significant. National Human Rights Commission regularly approaches the courts. The only demand of the NHRC or the NGOs is, of course, the NHRC should be approaching more. So the point is, you have to engage. And I raised the issue of engagement because I was reading in newspapers where even our own participation here is being certified. We ourselves being certified from the NGO sector. I would only say this, that certain decisions need not be trivialized. If we are to participate in a process, if we believe in democracy, of course we have to engage in dialogue. Now, if G20 summit is going to take place in the United States in 2025, are you going to question based on the outcome of an election? So the very processes where decisions are taken, if they are trivialized by the non-governmental organizations, I don't think it helps. It distracts, it discourages. And I would say that I think as human rights activists, we have to engage with whatever we are given. We are not here to change the national institutions, we are not here to change the judiciary, we are not here to change the government. Because if you disengage from dialogue and engagement, then those doors are closed, and obviously you will not find. Then you are no longer a human rights activist. Possibly you are a revolutionary. At any given point of time, I think we have 500 to 1,000 cases pending with the NHRC. So if I were to ask the victims, they will. If I tell them I'll disengage with the National Human Rights Commission, State Human Rights Commission, they will question my own authenticity. Because every case which we take up is not made out in the court of the law where it has to be established beyond reasonable doubt. But whereas the national institutions, based on the preponderance of probabilities, can establish this. So NHRC has ended up servicing the people, and Justice Mishra had mentioned how many cases are taken up every year. So that's why the victims want to engage with them. It's possibly people who do not want it. And finally, I would say is that the challenges which we had 30 years back still continues. The national institutions have the same role. The NGOs have the same role. I think what we need to remain in mind is the victims. If we remind if our actions is based on the welfare of the victims, then I think we could find why we need to engage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Suhas Chakma.